Check my balance.
I can.
That's not right.
I'm sorry.
Raymond Washington was 62 years old when he walked into the bank branch on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning in October. He was there because his daughter had called him the night before and told him something that he had been awake since 2 in the morning trying to make sense of. She had found documents. She had pulled records. She had spent 6 weeks assembling a picture of what had been happening to his finances. And she had called him on a Sunday evening and walked him through it for 40 minutes. And Raymond, who had trusted his son with everything, had listened to his daughter and then told her he needed to see it for himself. He needed to look at his own screen with his own eyes. He needed the bank to tell him directly. The teller looked at her screen. Then she looked at Raymond. Then she looked at her screen one more time, as if the number might change if she gave it another chance to. It did not change. She told him the account was empty. Every single dollar. Gone. $308,000 built across 31 years of 3 jobs, and early mornings and missed Christmases, and a belief that a black man from Birmingham, Alabama, who started with nothing, could end with something worth leaving behind. Gone. And the person who had taken it was not a stranger. It was his son, the boy he had worked 3 jobs to give a better life to. The young man who had sat at his Sunday dinner table for 20 years and accepted everything Raymond had built. And then, quietly and methodically, and over 6 years, taken all of it. There is a particular kind of theft that the law has a name for, that the people who survive it struggle for years to find adequate language to describe. It is not the theft of a stranger. It is not the kind of loss that comes from the outside, from someone who did not know you, did not love you, did not sit at your table and eat the food you provided, and sleep under the roof you paid for, and wear the clothes your labor purchased. It is the theft that comes from inside the house, from inside the family, from the person you spent 31 years working 3 jobs specifically to give a better life to. And it is the kind of theft that does not just take money. It takes the story you told yourself about what all of that sacrifice was for. It takes the future you believed you were building. And it takes something that no court order and no restitution check can ever fully return. The ability to look at your own child and feel safe. This is that story. And before it is over, it will make you think very carefully about every person you have ever handed your trust to without asking for it back. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Raymond James Washington was born in 1956 in Birmingham, Alabama, the third of 6 children raised by a father who worked at the steel mill and a mother who cleaned houses on the other side of town 6 days a week. Birmingham in the 1950s and 1960s was not a gentle place to grow up black. It was a city still in the grip of everything that word meant in those years. The signs, the distances, the daily negotiations that black families made, with a world that had structured itself around their exclusion. Raymond grew up understanding this, not as an abstraction, but as the practical reality of daily life. He understood it in the way his father came home from the mill, in the way his mother moved through the houses she cleaned, in the way both of them carried themselves through a world that gave them very little room and filled that room with dignity anyway. He absorbed that dignity the way children absorb everything that defines the landscape of their earliest years. Completely, without question, as the only available definition of how a person was supposed to move through the world, and he carried it with him when he left Birmingham at 23 years old, and pointed himself toward something larger. He moved to Atlanta in 1979 with $400, a duffel bag, and a contact number for a cousin who knew someone hiring at the post office. He got the job. He worked it with the same discipline his father had brought to the steel mill, showing up early, staying late, never giving anyone a reason to look at him sideways. Atlanta in 1979 was a city on the move, a place where black ambition had room to operate in ways that Birmingham had not historically permitted. And Raymond felt that room immediately and moved into it with everything he had. Within 3 years, he had saved enough for a down payment on a house in the Cascade Heights neighborhood on the southwest side. A neighborhood where black families with discipline and vision were building exactly the kind of lives Raymond had come to Atlanta to build. He met Gloria May Simmons at a church function in 1982. She was a school teacher with a laugh that filled whatever room she was in and an intelligence that Raymond recognized immediately as the kind that made everything around it sharper. They were married in 1983. Marcus Raymond Washington was born in 1985. Their daughter, Denise Gloria Washington, arrived 2 years later in 1987, and Raymond added the second job the week Marcus came home from the hospital, because a father who understood what he was building did not wait to start building it. Raymond added the third job when Denise arrived. Weekend handyman worked through a company that serviced rental properties across the South Side. Gloria taught school during the week and kept the household running with organized precision because Raymond was almost never home during daylight hours on any day that ended in a Y. They were a team in the truest sense. Two people who had looked at what they wanted to build and divided the labor of building it with complete mutual understanding and without resentment. They were not building a comfortable life. They were building a legacy, a retirement account that Raymond contributed to every month without exception, a second property purchased in 1994, a rental house 3 streets over that generated steady income, a college fund that Gloria managed and protected and added to from her teacher's salary every single month from the day Marcus was born. Raymond did not talk about this work as sacrifice. He talked about it as investment. Every hour at every job was a deposit into the future he was building for his children. He believed that completely. He believed it the way a man believes something he has staked his entire life on. And that belief, absolute, unexamined, and unconditional, was the most expensive thing Raymond Washington ever owned. Marcus Washington grew up watching his father work. He watched it the way children watch the things that define the landscape of their childhood, absorbing it into the structure of who he was becoming without always understanding what he was absorbing. He was a bright child, his teachers said so consistently and without reservation, quick with numbers, quick with people, possessed of the kind of natural confidence that makes rooms pay attention. Raymond saw in Marcus everything he had hoped to pass on, the intelligence, the presence, the hunger. What he did not see was the specific way Marcus experienced the 3 jobs, not as sacrifice, not as love expressed through labor. Marcus experienced the 3 jobs as evidence of a system that had required his father to give everything and return very little. And he had decided, somewhere in his teenage years, that he was not going to operate inside that system the way Raymond had. He was going to find a faster way. He just had not yet decided whose resources he was going to use to find it. And by the time he had decided, he had already made sure those resources were within reach. Marcus graduated from Morehouse College in 2007 with a degree in business administration, paid for entirely by the college fund Gloria had been building since 1985. Raymond attended the graduation in a suit he had pressed the night before and sat in those stands with the specific pride of a man watching the return on 30 years of investment materialize in real time. He shook his son's hand on the steps of the graduation hall and told him that everything he had worked for had been for this moment. Marcus smiled and said he knew, and he did know. He knew exactly what his father had worked for. He knew where it was kept and how it was structured and what it was worth and whose name was on every account and every deed and every document. He had been paying very close attention for years, just not to the lessons Raymond thought he had been teaching him, And standing on those steps in a cap and gown that his parents' sacrifice had purchased, Marcus Washington had already begun the calculations that would cost them everything. Marcus returned to Atlanta after graduation with a vocabulary that Raymond did not fully recognize. Terms from finance and investment and wealth management that sounded exactly like the language of the generational wealth Raymond had spent his life trying to build. Marcus talked about diversification and portfolio management, and leveraging existing assets to generate returns that a postal worker's retirement account sitting in a standard fund could never produce on its own. He talked about opportunities available to people who understood how money actually worked as opposed to people who simply saved it and hoped. And Raymond, who had spent 31 years doing exactly that, saving it and hoping, listened to his son with the particular openness of a man who believed that the education he had sacrificed to provide was now coming back to serve the family in ways he himself had not been equipped to deliver. He did not hear the calculation underneath the vocabulary. He heard the promise, he heard his son. And he said yes, the transfer of financial authority did not happen all at once. It never does in cases like this one. And the investigators who would later examine the Washington family finances noted this with the precision of people who had seen the same pattern before, in different families, with different names in different cities across the country. Marcus began with the rental property. He told his father that the existing property management arrangement was costing the family money that a more sophisticated approach could recover. Raymond gave him authority to restructure it. Marcus restructured it by quietly redirecting the rental income into an account Raymond did not have direct visibility into. It was a small move, almost invisible on its own, but it established something critical. It established that Marcus could touch the money, and Raymond would not immediately notice. That knowledge was the foundation everything else was built on. And Marcus built on it with the patience of someone who had calculated the timeline and understood that moving too fast was the only real risk available to him. Over the following 2 years, Marcus expanded his authority across the family's entire financial life with a deliberateness that investigators would later describe as methodical. He moved Raymond and Gloria onto a family financial management platform that consolidated all their accounts in one place, making it easier to track everything, he said. What it actually did was give Marcus administrative access to every account simultaneously and in real time. He took over the bill payments to save his parents the hassle. He handled the tax filings because the situation had become more complex with the rental income. He made himself, by incremental and reasonable-seeming steps, the single point of control through which all of the Washington family's financial life passed. And he did this not through force or obvious deception. He did it through helpfulness, through the appearance of a devoted son taking care of his aging parents, through the oldest and most reliable tool available to someone who needs access, trust that has been built over decades and has never previously been examined. He suggested refinancing the mortgage on the Cascade Heights house to access equity at a lower rate. A smart financial move, he said, that would give them capital to put to work more effectively. Raymond and Gloria signed the refinancing documents at their kitchen table in 2009. They did not read every page. They trusted their son. They had spent 24 years teaching him that trust within a family was the foundation of everything. They signed where he pointed and initialed, where he directed and handed the documents back to him with the easy confidence of people who had no reason to believe that the person sitting across their kitchen table was not who he had always been. Marcus took the documents. He filed them. He drew down the equity line within the following 14 months. And he moved the money into accounts. Raymond and Gloria could not see through the platform he controlled. By the end of 2013, Marcus had drained $47,000 from the rental property income account. He had transferred $63,000 from Raymond's retirement fund in incremental amounts carefully kept below the threshold that triggered automatic alerts. Never more than $4,000 in a single transaction, spread across 17 months of patient and calculated withdrawals. He had drawn down $89,000 against the home equity line across 14 months of transactions. He had opened 2 credit cards in Gloria's name using her social security number and her date of birth, information he had access to through the family financial platform, and had run both cards to their limits across 18 months of charges in 3 different states. The total extracted from Raymond and Gloria Washington's financial life by the end of 2013 was $241,000, and Raymond continued getting up before sunrise. Gloria continued teaching school, and both of them continued trusting the son they had built everything for, because nothing in their experience of Marcus had given them any reason to do anything else. The years between 2013 and 2018 were years in which the consequences of what Marcus had done began to make themselves felt in ways that Raymond and Gloria attributed to other causes. The rental house that had reliably generated income for 20 years was suddenly generating less. Marcus explained this with maintenance issues and difficult tenants and a challenging rental market. The retirement account seemed not to have grown the way Raymond had expected. Marcus explained this with market volatility and investment complexity. The household budget that Gloria had always kept with meticulous precision began to feel tighter than it should have at this stage of their lives, and neither of them connected that tightness to the person who had been managing their finances for 6 years. They were not financially unsophisticated people. They were people who had been managed by someone who understood exactly how much trust they had placed in him and had built his entire operation on top of it. The discovery began not with Raymond, but with Denise. Denise Washington Carter was 31 years old in 2018, working as a paralegal at a law firm in Decatur, and had been quietly concerned about her parents' finances for 2 years without being able to name exactly what was concerning her. It was a collection of small things that did not individually constitute an alarm, but that collectively produced a discomfort she could not dismiss. Her father mentioning that the rental house had not been generating as much income as it used to. Her mother saying carefully that things were a little tighter than they had expected at this point. Marcus being vague when she asked general questions about their parents' retirement planning, deflecting with terminology and reassurance in equal measure. And one specific moment in the spring of 2018, when Denise visited her parents and noticed that the water heater had been broken for 3 weeks and her father had not replaced it. Not because he did not know it needed replacing, but because he was waiting until the following month when things loosened up. Raymond Washington, who had worked 3 jobs for 30 years, was waiting on a water heater, and Denise understood in that moment that something was very wrong. She asked her mother directly that evening. Gloria was quiet for a long time before she spoke. She said that Marcus had told them the rental property needed significant repairs and that the income would be reduced for a while. She said that the retirement account had apparently taken losses in a market downturn that Marcus was working to recover. She said that the home equity line had been necessary for investment purposes that Marcus had explained and that Raymond had agreed to. She said all of this in the careful, measured voice of a woman who had been telling herself for 2 years that her son knew what he was doing, and that the discomfort she felt when she thought about it was just the anxiety of someone who did not understand finance. Denise listened to every word. Then she drove home and used every skill her years of paralegal work had given her and began pulling the threads. She requested account statements. She pulled property records. She cross-referenced transaction histories with the timeline of Marcus's financial management. She worked evenings and weekends for 6 weeks, with the focused determination of someone who already suspected what she was going to find and was assembling the proof anyway, because proof was the only thing that would make what she had to say to her father possible to say. What Denise found was not the story of bad investments or market losses or necessary expenditures. It was the story of a systematic, sustained, and deliberate extraction of her parents' financial life across nearly 6 years. The rental income diverted into accounts Raymond had never seen. The retirement fund drained in careful increments designed to avoid detection. The home equity line opened and emptied across 14 months. The credit cards opened in Gloria's name and maxed across transactions in cities Gloria had never visited. The total figure, when Denise had assembled enough documentation to be confident in the number, was $241,000, plus an additional $67,000 in accumulated interest and fees on the fraudulent debts Marcus had created in her parents' names, $308,000, 31 years of 3 jobs, gone. She sat with that number for a long time before she picked up the phone, because she knew what the call was going to do to her father, and she made it anyway, because not making it was the only thing that would have been worse. Denise called Raymond on a Sunday evening in September 2018. She had rehearsed what she was going to say for 3 days. She had assembled the documents in a folder so she could walk her father through them in a logical sequence that made what she was telling him impossible to dismiss. Raymond listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. Denise could hear his breathing change about 15 minutes in, a shift so subtle she almost missed it, but she knew her father's voice, and she knew what it meant. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said one thing. He said he needed to call Gloria. He hung up. Denise sat in her car in a grocery store parking lot where she had pulled over to make the call and did not move for a very long time. The following morning, Raymond drove to the bank on Peachtree Street and asked the teller to check the retirement account balance. He needed the bank to confirm what his daughter had told him. He needed to hear it from someone else. He needed to sit in that chair and watch another person's face when the number came up on the screen. The teller looked. Then she looked at him. Then she looked again. The account was empty. And Raymond Washington drove home from that bank branch in the specific silence of a man who has just had the last remaining possibility of a different explanation removed from him completely. The family contacted an attorney within the week. A forensic accountant spent 11 weeks going through every document Denise had assembled and every additional record they were able to subpoena. The forensic accountant's report delivered in January 2019 confirmed and expanded everything Denise had found. The total documented financial harm to Raymond and Gloria Washington was $308,000. The report noted that the scheme had been executed with a degree of financial sophistication that indicated advanced planning, that the consolidation of accounts onto a single platform, the gradual assumption of bill payment authority, the incremental nature of the retirement fund withdrawals, and the careful structuring of individual transactions to stay below detection thresholds, all pointed to a pattern designed to operate undetected over the maximum possible time period. The forensic accountant told Denise's attorney that this was among the more thoroughly executed cases of familial financial fraud he had examined in 20 years of practice. He did not mean it as a compliment. He meant it as an honest assessment of how long Raymond and Gloria had been managed without knowing they were being managed at all. Marcus Washington was contacted by the attorney in February 2019. He denied everything initially, producing explanations for individual transactions that were coherent in isolation and completely inadequate when placed against the full documented record. When the forensic accountant's report was shared with him in a meeting that also included his parents, he shifted from denial to minimization, acknowledging that some financial management had not been as transparent as it should have been, that some decisions had been made that in retrospect required better communication, that the family's financial situation had been more complicated than his parents understood, and that he had been managing that complexity under significant pressure. Raymond sat across the table from his son during this meeting and said nothing for the entire 2 hours it lasted. He watched Marcus move through denial and minimization and qualification with the focused attention of a man memorizing something he needed to understand completely. Gloria wept quietly at one point, and Marcus did not look at her. Denise took notes with the steady precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months and was not going to let anything that happened in that room escape the record. And Marcus Washington sat in that conference room and used the vocabulary of financial complexity to describe what the documents on the table described in considerably simpler terms. Theft, sustained across 6 years, from the two people who had given him everything he had ever been given. The civil case was filed in March 2019. A settlement was reached in May 2020, Marcus agreeing to repay $172,000 in structured payments across 10 years and to sign over his interest in any future inheritance from the family estate, the remaining $136,000. A third of everything Raymond had spent 31 years building was simply gone. There was no mechanism to recover it. It had been spent on failed ventures in Charlotte and Miami, on a lifestyle Marcus had been sustaining above what his legitimate income could have supported, on debts to private lenders he had been servicing with his parents' money rather than his own. Raymond Washington, who had worked 3 jobs so his children would not have to start from nothing, was 63 years old and starting again. And the word that kept coming back to the people who knew him when they tried to describe how he carried that reality was not broken. It was not defeated. The word they used was quiet. Raymond Washington had gone quiet in a way he had not been before. Not cold, not bitter, just quiet. In the way that a man goes quiet when something he built with his hands for 31 years is gone, and the person who took it is someone he taught to walk. Raymond and Gloria still live in the Cascade Heights house, though the home equity line Marcus drew against it means they carry a debt on a property they had nearly paid off that will take 15 more years to clear. The rental house was sold in 2019 to cover legal fees and immediate financial needs. Raymond retired from the post office at 65, but continues to do handyman work 3 days a week. Not because he wants to, but because the retirement fund that was supposed to make that unnecessary no longer exists in the form it was built to exist in. Gloria retired from teaching in 2021 and manages the household with the same organized precision she has always brought to everything, though the household she is managing now is considerably more constrained than the one she and Raymond spent 30 years building toward. Denise visits every Sunday without exception. She sits with her parents in the living room of the Cascade Heights house and talks about ordinary things: her work, her children, the neighborhood, the news. Marcus has not been to the house since the settlement was signed. Raymond has not spoken to his son since the conference room in February 2019. He has said in conversations with people close to him that he does not know if he will again. Not from bitterness. Raymond Washington is not a bitter man, but from a simple and settled understanding that some distances once created are too wide to cross back over without losing something in the crossing that neither person can afford to lose. There is a question that sits at the center of this story, and it is not a comfortable one. Raymond Washington worked 3 jobs for 30 years because he believed he was building something for his children. Marcus Washington dismantled that something over 6 years because he believed he was entitled to it on a timeline that did not require him to earn it. Those 2 beliefs, one about sacrifice and one about entitlement, existed inside the same family, at the same table, under the same roof, for decades before they collided at a bank teller's window on a Tuesday morning in October. And the collision cost Raymond Washington everything except the one thing Marcus could not take: the knowledge that he had built it, that it had been real. That 31 years of 3 jobs and missed birthdays and early mornings and pressed suits had produced something worth stealing, and that the person who stole it had only been able to do so because Raymond had loved him enough to trust him with everything. That love was not a weakness. It was the most human thing Raymond Washington ever did, and it cost him more than any man should ever have to pay for loving his own child. What would you have done if you were Denise sitting in that car after calling your father? Would you have made that call, or would you have found a way to protect your parents from what you had found? And if you had been Raymond sitting across that conference room table from your son, what would you have said? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one, and we want to hear from you. If this story reached something in you, if it made you think about the people you have trusted with everything you have built, and whether that trust has ever been examined as carefully as it deserves to be, then you are exactly the person this channel was built for. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and come back for our next story. Because what we are bringing you tomorrow is another story about family, about sacrifice, and about the specific kind of betrayal that only the people closest to you are positioned to deliver. And you do not want to miss it.